There is a misconception that this is all happening because of climate change. Certainly some of it is happening because of climate change, but like you and I were talking about, we remember 1986, we remember 1993, we remember 1997, 2005, 2006, 2017. These were all big water years. California's cycle has always cycled between 3 or 4 arid years and then 1 or 2 really big ones. Right. The difference, I think, is just that now the depths are getting deeper, right? The depths of the drought are getting lower, and that is largely due to climate change and other factors. So it's harder to recover from those.
Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Back by popular demand, we have Alexandra Biering with the Friant, rhymes with giant, Water Authority. Alex, how's it going? Thanks for coming back on.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here again, and I don't know what sort of popular demand you're talking about, but I'm happy to be back because it's been quite a year so far in water.
Yesterday I saw on Twitter, you pointed out something that you got this compliment a couple years ago that when something was awkward, you would just point it out blatantly and you'd be like, that is awkward.
Exactly.
Like release the tension.
Yeah.
So anything you need to point out right now, just the elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room. That did happen when I was in grad school. I can't remember. I think it was my friend Brooks maybe said this to me, and he said I was doing some presentation and someone flubbed something, and I can't remember what it was, and he was just, and I pointed it out, and I said, well, that was really awkward, and now we're moving on, and he said, it's such a great quality to diffuse the tension in the room when someone does something strange, and then everyone just feels bizarre about it. So I don't know why I was thinking about that, but yeah, I think the thing that we're all kind of grappling with right now is like, when I was here like 6 months ago, maybe we were talking about $100 billion surpluses, and we were talking about no water. Yeah. And now we're talking about a lot of water. And so last year we had money, but no water. This year we have water, but no money. So it's quite a change for that 6 or 7 month period. But that's how California always works, right? We're a land of extremes. Everything cycles through those extremes. So yeah, we've had 10 atmospheric rivers from late December to late January, and we had about half the precipitation that we'll get statewide in just that 3 or 4 week period. Wow. So that about 50% of all the rain and snow we'll get all season long, and I think we've got about. The snowpack right now is about 80% from what I last read about what it normally is. And so that's actually pretty good. The snowpack is in good shape, relatively speaking. The reservoirs are about 57% capacity. That's a little bit lower than they typically are at this time of year, but that's all from like one series of storms that all came really quickly back to back. So I think, aside from the obvious issues with like dealing with flooding and what to do with all this water and how do you manage, when suddenly all these creeks that have gone dry for years and years are just bursting. I think there's also a lot of concern about, or maybe there's a sigh of relief that people are thinking like, well, are we still in a drought? Right. And it certainly doesn't feel like it right now, but I think, when you look at the drought, when you talk about drought, we talk about it in terms of a long-term prognosis. It's a long-term thing. It's not like, are you getting water right now? Do things look green? Do things feel okay? Are there watering restrictions in place? Right. Anything like that. It's more, how many years have we been in a very arid condition? How many years have we had less than normal precipitation? Right. So these storms do a lot, especially for this year.
I couldn't believe it. I just was flying to Orange County and back the other day.
Did you see how much water was in the valley?
Yeah, we were landing and I was like, oh, there's Folsom Lake. And I was like, oh, well, let's see how full Folsom Lake is. And I was like, oh, that doesn't look really like Folsom Lake. And I was like, oh, wait, there's a nuclear power plant. And I was like, oh, this isn't Folsom. This is Wilton.
Yes. Yeah.
And Wilton, everything. It looked like just a lake everywhere all around Sacramento.
I know. So you're not the only person who said that. That was because of there was a levee breach on the Cosumnes River. That was really, I think, the only major flooding that we saw that was kind of unanticipated from what I saw, was that levee did breach and Wilton did get flooded. But a lot of beyond that, I mean, even just in the rest of the Central Valley, there's a lot of water on the ground right now. Some of that is planned, some of that is not as planned. People are trying to do recharge with whatever extra flood water they have, but It's not always possible. So I think, we still need to have a drought mindset because we're still considered like 80 or 90% of the state is still considered by the drought monitor as being like in a moderate drought. But last month, like that same amount of California was considered to be in an exceptional drought. So things have moved. The needle's moved a little bit, but we really do need at least one more year of average precip.
Right.
And we need the rest of this season to be as average as possible to sort of get back to some sense of normal. But you know how California is. Yeah. It just everything goes like this. So.
Well, it's kind of, before we started, we're talking about the great storms of yesteryear.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And how this compared. And it's kind of like, this happened last year, right? Where we got like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of really big storms and snow and things were great. And we're like, oh yes, problem solved. And then we had no rain the rest of the year.
Yes.
And so that's kind of how it's looking right now. Like we had this maybe like 10 storms.
Yeah.
And then like we're not seeing any coming. And it used to be kind of like you'd get on and off again storms all the way from December to April, right? You used to get those April showers, which brought May flowers. But we don't see that anymore.
Right.
And kind of, I don't know. I know it's kind of hard to see what's coming, but somehow the Farmer's Almanac and stuff does that. What's kind of the whispers in the water world about, is this just a one and done, or, are we going to see more rain coming?
I mean, I'm not a meteorologist.
Yeah.
I wish everyone had. I think we all wish we had a crystal ball right now to be able to figure that out. But you're right that, look at we were talking about 1997, but there was also even 2017, a couple years ago, we had this, it was very similar to what we're experiencing right now. And that continued to be a big water year because we did have some more storms. But what's scary is that when you're getting almost half of your overall precip in a 1 month period, then it seems like you probably won't see as many storms throughout the rest of the year. I mean, I hope that we will. I hope that we'll have at least a few more small ones because that's really what we need to emerge from drought more fully is like consistent moisture. The other thing that was kind of challenging about this year, again, when you're looking at having such massive storms that you're having half of your water come all at once in that short period, is that they're operational considerations that have changed throughout the water system in California since we've had a big storm like this. And one of them is when we're talking about like delta outflow. So we kept getting this question, what are we doing to capture this water? There's so much water coming. Right. How much can we use? And effectively, the answer was not as much as we'd like. And one of the reasons for that was that since the last biological opinions came out, which is just like the regulating plan for operating the state and federal water projects in the Delta, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, one of the most recent biological opinions required that for the first 2 weeks of a really big storm, of the first major winter storm of the year, they have to like ramp down the pumping at those pumps. So those are the pumps that take the water near Tracy and send it into the Delta Mendota Canal, the California Aqueduct, and deliver them to Southern California and the Valley. And for the first 2 weeks of the big winter storm, the first big winter storm of the year, the operators have to shut down like capacity, like a lot of capacity in those pumps. So what we saw was that, and the reason they do that is because there are all these threatened, listed species, sensitive species in the Delta, right? And they like to hang out near the pumps and they just sort of like float around there. And this 2 week period, they call it the first flush. And it's supposed to basically allow those fish time and water to move away from the pump so they don't get sucked in. Right. So they ramped down that pumping for 2 weeks, and that coincided with the first 2 weeks of a major 3 week period of precipitation, of like massive precipitation. So we lost probably, I think PPIC estimated that we lost about like 80 to 90,000 acre feet of water that we weren't able to move that would have otherwise been available. So I think there are a lot of people that, and this was, I believe it was a new regulation in for the biological opinion and the plans for operating the pumps. So I think a lot of people were surprised by that, and it kind of people bristled a little bit. A lot of our elected officials on a bipartisan basis started sending letters to state and federal agencies and administrations like, hey, wow, this is not exactly what we had intended when we put this in, or at least it's not what the ideal situation is, because you're looking at those 2 weeks. Those were like probably the biggest 2 weeks. And you had to really reduce how much water you could move and how much water you could take.
Yeah, we've had Dr. Marty Ralph on. He kind of talked to us about atmospheric rivers and things like that. Yeah. And that's kind of, he's like, this is the future. Like, we're just going to get these violent storms. We're going to have tons of water. And so it's kind of like, well, if this is our future, we got to figure out how to deal with it, right?
Right.
And so we're just getting a lot of water really quickly. And, how do we, I guess, store it? Like you just said, what'd you say? Like the Folsom was like 57%, or were you threw some stats out?
Yeah, no, statewide, where the reservoir capacity is about 57% of average, which is like, that's just below, like I think 60% is the average, like long term. So for this type of year and this time of year. And so I think that's pretty close. Like you look at that number and you think, okay, so we're not doing so bad, but it's coming on the heels of like multiple years where it was far lower than that.
Right. Yeah, I guess like, what was it like in like October?
Yeah, I know. I should have looked that up. I don't know if I looked that up. But he's right. I think there is a misconception that this is all happening because of climate change. Certainly some of it is happening because of climate change, but like you and I were talking about, we remember 1986, we remember 1993, we remember 1997, 2005, 2006, 2017. These were all big water years. California's cycle has always cycled between 3 or 4 arid years and then 1 or 2 really big ones. Right. And then the difference, I think, is just that now the depths are getting deeper, right? The depths of the drought are getting lower. And that is largely due to climate change and other factors. So it's harder to recover from those. So, I mean, I think, things that we're doing certainly in terms of conveyance, which we talked about last time, canals and things like that. It's hard to build new dams. It's hard to raise new dams or raise dams, but you can move water effectively to groundwater storage, which is what will be even easier to do once these canal fixes are in.
Right. That's kind of what I wanted to ask. Yeah. Like, I think last time you said like how many dams you like we have 1,000.
Yeah, we have like 1,600 dams or something in California.
Like if you built another dam, it'd be the 1,601 best
location.
Spot.
Yeah.
And so obviously there's not many good new dams. Yeah. Like that's not a good place to put your money.
Yeah.
And you started talking about kind of groundwater storage and kind of like we just got all this water. And so, like, what do we do with it? Yeah. Are we storing it at all right now? And like, so I talked about the Delta and that there are some constraints on how much water we could use when those really, really high flows were available, how much water we could actually take from the Delta and move to other places, which turns out, not as much as we'd wanted to. That's on the sort of west side of the state and the valley. When you look on the east side of the San Joaquin Valley, so like where the Friant Division is located, we're actually doing pretty well. The watershed above Friant Dam is storing, we just got snowflight data back yesterday, and it says that we have about I think it was 2.3 million acre feet of water sitting in the snowpack up there. So that's actually putting us in really good shape on the east side in terms of the water supply that we expect to have in Friant Dam for the Friant Division contractors. And of course, the Friant Division contractors are intended and designed, all those contracts are intended and designed to be conjunctive use, part of a giant conjunctive use project. Right. So they're all, like most of them are doing some amount of recharge or have the capacity to do recharge. So those that can take it on the east side are Madera, the folks off the Madera Canal, that's Madera Irrigation District, and Chowchilla and a few others. They can do a lot of recharge, and they're extremely aggressive in doing like on-farm recharge also. So they're not just taking water. Not a lot of people are like irrigating right now. So they're taking water and putting it on the crops and trees that are able to tolerate deeper water just like sitting on the surface. So they're doing tons of recharge. They're just pumping as much as they can down the canal and out into the fields.
And on the Friant Canal, so Friant Current Canal south of Friant Dam along there. So unfortunately, we scheduled a major canal outage during December and January because it's such good timing. Again, with that crystal ball thing, we all kind of wish we had one. But I mean, you know, you look at it and after 3 or 4 years of drought, you think, well, what are the chances we're going to have a big year? And then, you know, having the urgency of implementing that fix was more important than waiting till like the opportune time. Right. And this seemed like it could be a good time to do it. But yeah, it was not great timing. So we did lose out on the ability to move some water for recharge this year. But some of the folks that are above the pinch point off the canal are taking water for recharge. So Fresno Irrigation District is doing recharge. Tulare Irrigation District is doing a ton of recharge. There are a lot of Friant contractors on the canal who are like actively ramping up their recharge projects right now. But yeah, we had that outage. That was a bummer.
Yeah.
So
earlier we were talking about how cold it was. And, and you kind of surprised me. You're like, I hope it stays this way because it's good for our snowpack. Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, we forget that the snowpack is kind of like a savings account for us, right?
Yeah.
Water savings.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we're talking about, you know, dams and, you know, water coming, you know, how do you calculate the snowpack and how that's going to help?
Yeah.
You know, I guess in hopefully 6 months or so when it starts to melt and come our way.
Exactly. No, I always tell people whenever I say, I hope it stays this cold, people are like, why? And it's just for that reason. I mean, I think if you,
to Canada.
I know, right? Exactly. If you're going to make a comparison, since you brought up the savings account thing, I'm gonna tweak that a little bit. I'm gonna say that the groundwater is supposed to be our savings account.
Okay.
The snowpack is our checking account, right? So that's how it's supposed to work. And right now, you know, we've got all that water up there and it's stored in the snowpack. And the way that we measure it, there are a lot of different ways to measure it. So there are a bunch of remote like snow measurement locations. They've got things called snow pillows that like literally like a rubber pillow thing that's on the ground and it measures different factors and characteristics of the snowpack above it. But we actually use something else and it's called ASO. It's Airborne Snow Observatories. And so it grew out of a project at NASA JPL. And it is a like plane mounted LiDAR, light detection and ranging, I think. And it's a very simple technology. It's not simple technology. It's complex technology, but it makes a simple calculation. You know what the land or surface elevation is in a whole basin. You do a flight to figure out what the actual surface elevation of the land without snow on it is. And then every month or so during the winter, these planes go up and they measure multiple locations over every square meter of the entire upper watershed. And then subtract one from the other and you have a sense of how much, you know, how deep the snowpack is. That's probably the simplest of all the sort of information that comes out of it. But they also have information, they can gather information about the snow. There's some technical terms, I'm not going to use them, but basically how much light is reflecting off the snow, and that can tell you how dense it is, how much ice there is, all these things that feed into an assessment of what the runoff will be like in, say, 2 weeks. So we can know with some amount of certainty now exactly how much runoff will be occurring into the San Joaquin River system at any point 2 weeks from now, with like 98% accuracy. So it is a much more granular and detailed and helpful set of tools and data. It's something that the state is using as well, and they're incorporating and paying for some of these flights. We're doing some of them. The federal government is paying for some of them, and they're doing it in a lot of basins now. So it's not just the San Joaquin; it's several others right alongside them in the Central Sierra, and that is particularly important because the Central Sierra has some of the deepest, longest lasting snowpack in the state. You'll have snow there much longer than you'll have it in, say, like Tahoe or something like that. So that's how we take a look at how much water is going to be potentially available. That feeds into how the Bureau of Reclamation makes water allocations for some of the contractors on the east side of the valley, and other places. So it's pretty useful. We've been doing it since about 2016, and it's also just really cool. We get really cool graphics from it, and I don't know, it's fun, and it helps. It's helpful for districts who are doing recharge because they can know how to schedule. They'll know what's coming down the hill, and so they'll know how to maximize their opportunity to spread water and where to put it and when to get ready, when to ramp up.
Yeah. Can you explain when is it beneficial for it to melt?
Yeah.
You're kind of talking about you don't want to melt too early.
You did, you did ask that. So the way that our whole water management system broadly in California is predicated on the idea that under the traditional hydrology that we've experienced over the past 150 years or so, we know that starting in about April, it starts melting, the snow starts melting, it's getting warmer, runoff starts increasing. In most areas, kind of peaks in June and July, and then it trickles out, so to speak. And then that also comports with when a lot of farmers need to water their crops throughout the spring and summer. And so you said we talked about how the snowpack is like the savings account or the checking account. We rely on it to stay there because we can't capture all of that water all at once. There's no way to build enough reservoirs to capture all that water if it were just to come as rain or if it were all to melt at once. What's happening is that now we're starting to see that runoff period begin earlier in the year, and that is because of climate change. And so, something that might have come as flood water, as like runoff, high flows during the spring, during April, May, June, may now be coming in February or March. And I mean, there are implications for that in terms of how we can use the water and for what purpose, who can take the water, because there are a lot of water rights permits that are, and water rights that are set by the Water Resources Control Board based on whether we're in a winter flood period, a runoff period, fall, what have you. And it's complicating some of this stuff. So there's a big hydrology shift that's happening right now that is making our water system and water management system a little less efficient, a lot less efficient. And that's why things like having these more detailed tools and information about how to manage the resources that are either up in the watershed or already there now in the reservoirs is important.
Yeah, who owns our water is pretty interesting. Melissa Hurtado came on and she was talking about a foreign government could just come in and buy water rights. And I think she's, doing a bill to that.
Yeah, she's talked to me about that before.
Can you kind of talk about water allocations? You got the state government, you got the federal government, you got private interests. How does that all work?
Yeah. I mean, at a very basic level, all waters in California, all water in California is held in public trust for public uses by the state of California. You can't really own the water. You can get a water right, and that's something that's granted by the Water Resources Control Board. They started granting water rights through permits and licenses. If you were a diverter before 1914, then you have what we call pre-1914 rights, and you can they're higher priority. They're the oldest rights on the books, so to speak. But if you came in later, the Johnny-come-latelys have to apply for water rights from the Water Resources Control Board, and it's actually a pretty long process. And it can be, I mean, I'm not an attorney, so I won't get too deep in the weeds here, but the state owns or holds water rights for and permits for the State Water Project that it built in the 1960s. Federal government owns water rights through permits and licenses for the Central Valley Project, which it started in the 30s and built out through the 60s. And so they control, they hold those water rights, and then they make allocations for their water users. So the State Water Project last week just got a 30% allocation, which, again, going back to my comments about we're not able to do as much with this water as we would like to. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of water that came down. To only have a 30% allocation right now, that seems like they're being pretty conservative. I don't know. We don't know what the Bureau of Reclamation allocations are going to be, but I think those come out next month. But they decide how much water all their contractors, which are irrigation districts, cities, primarily special districts, counties, whomever, they decide how much water those entities can take from the water rights that they have on the books. So say you have 100 units of water rights. They look at the hydrology, they look at how much water's come, and then they say, okay, contract holders, you guys can have 60 of this, or you can have 50 of it. We don't have enough this year, whatever it is. So they kind of hold the keys in terms of how much folks can get, but there are a lot of other factors that play into that in terms of environmental regulations and, you know, all these other things that dictate some of that. And so we do have a lot of different types of water rights throughout the state, and it does get a little, it does get really confusing. And there's a lot of talk right now about, should we just throw out the whole system? We should just like throw out water rights are, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of words and names and things being lobbed at poor water rights in California right now. But the reality is this is a system that's developed over like more than a century. There are a lot of arrangements in place to allow us to use that water most effectively and flexibly with, you know, exchanges between different water users and transfers and purchases. To redo it from scratch would be a gargantuan task. I just don't know if it makes sense
like,
to do.
Can you sell your water? Like, so if you're like, you have these 1914 water rights, that's something like sold, and passed down to generations.
It stays, if you have it, it stays, those are typically, they stay with your land, typically. Yeah. So, again, not a water rights attorney, but there are some who have those pre-1914 water rights there's some in the Delta, there's some in the Central Valley, there's some in the upper watersheds. There's some real ditches out there. So there's that. And then the rest of us are all just relying on, for the most part, the water rights that our water suppliers have acquired at some point. Either they have it from the state water project, or they have it from the Central Valley project, or in the case of Sacramento, we have, I mean, talk about pre-1914 rights. Our rights go back to like the 1850s for taking water from the Sacramento River.
Wow.
So it really is a patchwork all over the place. And that's what makes it so complex, is that you may have multiple entities who have water rights in one area, or is a supplier, or it's a water right that you have for your farm, but then there's a city. I mean, it's all very location specific as to like, yeah. I mean, in terms of who can buy water rights, yeah. I mean, let's say you're a company and you're like the majority landowner in, say, an irrigation district, and you're from ABC International Corporation, I just made that up, then you can, if you go to apply for a water right at the Water Rights or the Water Resources Control Board, and you're the majority landowner in an irrigation district, yeah, a company could control water. But and things like that do happen. But I think it's really sexy to make it, or it's very appealing somehow to make it seem like a great conspiracy.
Right.
But I don't think it always is. But yes, I mean, there are, I mean, look at Wonderful. Wonderful owns a ton of the land in California, and they control a lot of the water with it. And it's a private company, but you know, I mean, farming is still a business too. So,
right.
You know, so I think that the answer is, yeah, there have always been private entities involved, because there are private entities involved in farming. We don't have like public benefit farms. This is all, you know, these are communities and people. Yeah, I know, right? So maybe I just gave someone a good idea. I don't know about that. So yeah.
You know, last time we were on, we talked a lot, you know, we had this big budget surplus.
Right.
We talked about how great it would be if we had a few $100 million, or was it even $1 billion, to fix these canals and fix kind of how water could travel. Have you guys kind of calculated or seen like, man, if we had this canal up to 100% of what we wanted to do, like how much water could you guys have moved and saved this past storm that you weren't able to get to?
I mean, that is a good question. I have not done that calculation, but I could figure that out. I should have thought of that. Actually, the closest, I think, example for this year, I mean, obviously we had the canal outage this year where we scheduled 2 months because we were fixing the canal. We're fixing the problem that you're addressing. Right. And so we wouldn't have been able to move that water anyway. But in 2017, that was the next biggest year that's like this year. And that time we did lose about 300,000 acre feet that we could have used for groundwater storage. So, I mean, the good news is that this time next year, the project is going to be largely complete for the middle reach of the project of the whole canal, which is like the worst pinch point, the worst conveyance constriction. So, if we have another good year, it'll be useful then. But I mean, it is a bummer to have lost out on it this year. But we know it's for a good reason, and it's because we're trying to prevent that from happening in the future. Right. So, So I mean, I'm sure it's on an order of magnitude similar to that.
You know, what we noticed this, I guess, year, which I don't really recall ever happening, is just these giant trees just getting devastated, just destroyed, power outages.
Yeah.
But here at the Capitol, I've never seen these giant trees. And I imagine that happened up and down the valley. Kind of, how has all these kind of trees and kind of all this water affected the canal? And I'm sure it's made
the tree
mess
thing
in some spots.
Yeah, the tree thing was, I had a friend move here the biggest storm week, like the first big storm week. And she was like, is it always like this? Is it going to flood? And I said, no, actually, like this time you don't need to worry about the flooding piece. Right. Not really, because we spent about $4 billion at the state level with a local and federal match over the past 20 years, fixing levees and improving the flood system. But what you need to worry about is the trees. Right. This year it's the trees. And I've never seen that. Like you said, I've never seen it before. And basically my understanding is that in a period of prolonged drought, the roots kind of like, if you have shallow roots already, they sort of contract a little bit. They don't spread out as much or something like that. But the bigger thing is that a lot of them have shallower root systems, and then the soil was just like pudding, right? After like a week of storms, the soil was just, it was mush. And it was mostly these like large conifers and evergreens that were falling. So we don't have a ton of large evergreens in the valley, but I did talk to, I've talked to a couple of my farmers who have said that they had, like 10, 20, 30 acres that they had to clean up because a lot of the trees came down. If they're permanent crops. So I think and then they also said, well, and then we had to figure out what to do with them. We can't burn it because of the air quality. We can't. So it's like, I guess we'll just chop them up and see if anyone wants firewood.
There's a good barbecuing community.
Yes, exactly. Yep, I know. One of my other farmers does like a big barbecue every year and cooks a bunch of steaks. I was like, you could take advantage. Right. No, I mean, it's, I don't know that it's, what's happened in Sacramento is very different in terms of the trees is what's happened down there, just in terms of probably the size and the impact to like structures and things like that. I mean, we saw 1,000 trees maybe come down. My friends had a tree crush their garage. Other friends had a tree crush their car. I mean, I think I know a handful, I'm sure you do too, a handful of people who had like trees crush things they own, which is
like their house.
This has never happened before.
Did you see the one there on 9th Street? That giant
that was
one
crazy.
Crushed that little Honda
Yes, it was nuts. So that was really bizarre. And it was definitely the first time I remember thinking as well, wow, last time we had a year like this and a winter like this, I was worried about flooding. This time I'm worried about trees. And that maybe that's good. That could be progress. We spent a lot of money on flood protection over the years, and it's, we're seeing the benefits of that.
Yeah. One area just always confounds me that you always drive over is the causeway. You're driving over the causeway and, it's usually dry. And sometimes it's like super full. What is that water? Where does it go? Where does it come from?
Yeah.
Is it used for any good purposes?
Yeah. So that's interesting that it's, so that area, and it's been a while since I've worked in flood. I did for the first 5 or 6 years of my professional consulting career, did a lot of flood management stuff, but haven't as much in the last few years. But that area, you're talking mostly about the YOLO bypass and things like that. That the whole flood bypass system was built in the Sacramento area and the Sacramento Valley in probably the early half of the 20th century. And so that relieves pressure off the Sacramento River. And most of what's there are like rice fields and things like that. There are actually there are very few numbers of crops you can grow in that area because they need it to be available to absorb floodwater whenever floodwater comes. Right. So you can grow, I think, some grains, you can grow rice. It also provides a lot of habitat. So they've actually been looking at some strategic projects, even in years like this, especially, where you can provide like habitat and food sources for like salmon and other fish who may end up finding their way into, say, the Yellow Bypass because it's a big water year. And then they can just sit there and sit in the water and get fat and happy eating rice and bugs and whatever else they eat. I don't know exactly what they eat, but bugs at least. And so there are people that are trying to make those more multi-benefit projects, even though they were initially really just designed to be a big parking lot for water. So it's a place where we let the water out, like an off-ramp for water from the Sacramento River is basically what it is. And that's why it's located where it is. And that's also what dictates what you can really do there. But it also can provide habitat for, like, you probably saw a lot of birds, right? Right. There at one time was a ton of wetlands. There were a ton of wetlands in the Central Valley. I think we've lost more than 90% by this point. So when there are periods where you can have some sort of transitory water storage that can just sit in a place like that during the winter, it's hugely beneficial to migratory waterfowl and all sorts of other species. So it becomes like a temporary habitat as well as a flood protection feature.
Yeah. Earlier you're kind of talking about how like all this water that's just kind of sitting there on top of the ground, you can fly, you can see it. It's kind of helping, I guess, recharge a lot of the groundwater. And, you before talked about kind of recharge projects. Yeah. How does that work, and kind of where are they doing that, and kind of, can you kind of talk to us about that? Yeah, I mean, like I said in the past, the Friant division of the Central Valley Project was built to incorporate recharge as part of its function. It's supposed to function like, in some years you can take surface water and use it. In other years, you have to rely on the groundwater as backup. And so in a year like this, when there is a lot of surface water available, especially on the east side, you pull it off the canal at a turnout. And then there's usually another like local distribution area, or there may be a pond nearby the canal or something like that. And it's very similar to what's happening now at the Yellow Bypass. It just becomes like relieving pressure off of the canal. Well, not pressure necessarily, it's just taking water that's available. And then a lot of people are doing, the easiest way that people can do it quickly is just to have like a recharge pond or something like that, which is just like a big bathtub or dirt pool. It's like a dirt pool. And so you have a lot of recharge basins that can take that water, and it depends on the soil type and where you are in the system. Some areas can't take as much recharge. They don't have as much capacity to store groundwater. Others can. And so the ones that can will use it, and the ones that can't won't. And it does have it has benefits longer term, because you're able to replenish what you've taken out of the groundwater over the past couple years, because let's face it, everyone was pumping groundwater because there was no surface water available. Right. So we are trying to restore some of that in terms of the groundwater levels and stabilize the groundwater. Right. But then there are also a ton of small communities and rural communities along the east side of the valley that only depend on water from wells. So they only have water, they don't take surface water, they just have a well. Right. And they have been really impacted by the drought as well. And so when this water comes in, the contractors that'll take it will, and they'll be able to recharge, in some years, it's hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water, if that water is available. There are actually some communities, Tulare Irrigation District is doing a project with to do strategic groundwater recharge. So they're actually trying to do the recharge near communities to help with water quality and water availability. So kind of doing these sort of multi-benefit projects that exist with water that's available. And that becomes habitat potentially as well for, waterfowl for a period of time. So that's on the east side of the valley, because like I said earlier, like the San Joaquin system is doing pretty well. We're probably in our top 10% wettest years ever. So we're going to have a lot of water there. It's harder to move the water. Top 10, huh? Top 10%, yeah. If that's only if we remain average. Next show we should go through the top 10. I know, we could. David Letterman style. Yes, that's a good idea. I should have thought to do that. So on the west side, it's a little different though, because again, we have a constriction in the delta. Right. It's hard to get that water south from the Sacramento River south. There are recharge projects around Sacramento as well.
there's a lot of capacity to take water and recharge aquifers in the Sac Valley, and there's a lot of rice up there as well. So that is happening naturally for those types of crops that can really absorb a lot of high flows and standing water and flooding, more or less.
Kind of last time we talked about kind of this groundwater thing and how like the Central Valley or parts of it are like lowering because of these
the subsidence,
the water's
right?
Not. And I remember there was like one area where a farmer just like, that just kind of totally collapsed on itself. And you're kind of like,
so
that's their fault. Like they did that to themselves. Like they took too much water and now it collapsed.
Yeah. That's what we're dealing with on the Friant Canal. That's what our big project is to fix that. And I always say it's kind of a death spiral, which is a terrible way to say it. But when you have more groundwater overdraft and you are over pumping in certain areas, you're reducing the canal, you're lowering the canal physically, reducing its ability to carry more water to that area and replenish the groundwater. So it's like a cycle that perpetuates itself. It's like the snake eating its tail. And so we're trying to get out of that cycle by fixing the canal. So, yeah.
So you talked about this one area you're fixing. What's the status of, I guess, other areas that need to be fixed or are going to be fixed?
We're halfway through the Middle Reach capacity correction project, which is the first $500-ish million worth of projects that would restore 60% of the canal's capacity. So that's like the major big problem, the biggest problem. That'll be done in January 2024. And that'll be great news for everybody south of there, especially. There's also some...
And where is that south?
So that's that is like right around Porterville.
Okay.
If you know where... Yeah. It's like the bottom third, it's towards the bottom third of the canal.
It was pretty fun. After last time we talked, I took my kids down to Disneyland and there was a big accident on I-5.
Oh, yeah.
So then we had to go from the I-5 over through 99. And I got to drive through all these little communities and see all these little canals at work. So
it is cool. And what you realize when you go down 99 and you have to, you get on or off is that there are a lot of communities down there. There's so many. It's not like going on 99. So that's going to be hugely beneficial for folks who are around like Porterville and Terabella, southwards, all the way down to Bakersfield, especially because the further down you get, the more recharge you can do. So at the very bottom of the canal is Arvin Edison Water Storage District. They're a water storage district. Like literally they are designed to take hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water and put it in the ground and save it. And so it's a really big deal. It's like our project just hasn't been functioning as efficiently as it was designed to function because of that.
Would you say, so what is it functioning at? You're like, when we fix this, it will be 60%.
It will be,
So where are we at right now?
We will have regained that lost 60%. So it's going to bring it up to the original design capacity right there, which is to move about right now it can move about maybe 1,500 cubic feet per second. It's designed to move 4,000. So we're bringing it back to that 4,000. There's another pinch point a little higher up near the Kings River, kind of near Fresno. So it's pretty high up in the canal. And I think, if that's the upper reach, which we may pursue in the future, it would be great to restore the capacity there, but it's not nearly as bad as it is in the Middle Reach. So that's kind of,
I don't know, this kind of reminds me of this is the area where the high-speed rail is going.
Yeah.
We're going to have this super fast train. And,
Did you see the high speed? Did you see it?
I've seen it, yeah.
Okay, because a lot of people are like, just don't build it. I'm like, it's already being built. So you guys, this shows how few people actually drive down 99 regularly unless you are living and working in communities on the east side. Because other people, they have no idea. It's crazy.
And so we know all these other countries have these great high-speed rail systems, super fast trains, and here we just doesn't even exist. We go maybe 90 miles an hour. That's good. What about water? You were just talking about our canal can do 4,000 cubic
4,000, yeah.
What are other advanced countries with their advanced water systems, doing and able to move water in comparison?
I'm not for all of its warts, our water management system is still an absolute engineering marvel. The fact that we were able to build this and that we did absolutely.
So we're up there with the Dutch and the Romans.
They're different, definitely better than the Romans. Although I'm sure in their time they were certainly the primo example. The Dutch have different needs, but people do look to them, especially if you're talking about floods and flood protection. And because what they're dealing with in the Delta is there's some comparable, similarities and commonalities here in terms of levees and subsidence and islands. The one thing that people are talking a lot about, and this is not entirely your question, but about putting solar panels on canals. This is coming up a lot because they are doing it in other countries. And there are some studies right now. I think UC Merced has been doing some work and doing some studies on solar panels on canals. People have asked us, is this worth doing on the Friant Canal? And we have, it's hard to say. It's a gravity fed canal. It's just like, I saw someone describe it recently as like a giant slide at the park where you just slide down the whole way. So we don't use much energy, we don't have an energy need. So you're generating something, not sure what to do with that
It'd be
energy.
An evaporation
it
plant,
would be,
right?
it would be, I mean, that would be probably maybe even a better use of covering a canal. But the maintenance for that is like, I mean, how do you remove these so you can get in and do heavy machinery maintenance? I mean, it just becomes, it's really, I don't know if it pencils out for us, but it might for big like energy users, like the State Water Project, California Aqueduct, something like that. It could potentially. I mean, I think we're still looked to as an engineering marvel for sure. But it's been almost, 70 years since a lot of this was built. So you got to keep it up. And that's what we're having to do now. But yeah.
So despite, it was built 70 years ago, and, if you were to rebuild it today, you basically wouldn't do it any better? Or
I don't know. That's a good, I've never really thought about that. But, I think one of the things that was originally envisioned as part of a large statewide water management system, which first was designed by the state of California. And then, like we said last time on the show, went to the Great Depression, couldn't build it, handed it off to the feds, then built their own later with State Water Project. The Delta Conveyance one, you kind of can't talk about parts of the system that could improve without talking about how to make things better in the Delta.
Right.
And I have conspicuously stayed largely out of that debate through most of my career, which is, I won't say it's always a conscious choice, but everyone who works in water has to know enough about the Delta to know the whole system. The canal, the tunnel, which is now one tunnel proposed by the Newsom administration. It was 2 tunnels in the Brown administration. It was a canal previously through multiple administrations. That was always planned as part of the state's water project, whatever that was going to be. Some way to better move Sacramento River water around the Delta or through the Delta. And it wasn't built at the time. And I think, the thing that I think, I don't want to be a pessimist, but there needs to be a better way to improve water deliveries through the Delta, around the Delta, however you want to do it.
Right.
There's got to be something better for the species in the Delta because it's not great for them right now, the way we currently do it.
So you've never taken a position on the Delta?
Well, I have personally a position. But it's hugely expensive.
Right.
So, you're talking about, not as expensive as high-speed rail. High-speed rail is what, like $80 billion or something for the entire thing? Or
maybe
we don't even know. And I think that the Delta conveyance fix would be, I don't know, like 15 to 20 is what I remember from before. Something needs to change there because the reality is that it is still a very earthquake prone area. There are major faults under there. The levees that are in the Delta, a lot of them are not up to the federal flood protection standard. If you get a major, the way it is right now, if you get a major earthquake in that area, you are endangering water supplies for 27 to 30 million Californians.
Wow.
You would have to shut it off. You'd be like, no more. Now there's no water.
90% of us.
Yeah. And so then they'll have to go in and implement something really fast. Mm-hmm. And by that point, maybe we will have studied conveyance around or through the Delta so many times that we'll have like a plan on hand and you can just do it. Now it's time.
Build something really fast without
but it's, that's what scares me is that could happen. And so you're talking about how do you build more conveyance or how do you improve conveyance? Or is there anything we need? Like, I think we probably needed a better solution in the Delta from day one. I don't know what that is necessarily, but it hasn't really worked out the way it's worked. And it's also what's responsible for making reliability for folks that rely on Sacramento River water south of the Delta so much harder. So that would be something that I probably would have planned better, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't know necessarily what the solution is. But it's going to be a vexing problem. And now a lot of those communities that rely on Delta water, especially in Southern California, they have other water supplies. Yeah, they've got some from some local river in Southern California, or they've got groundwater, or they're taking it from the Colorado River. But we all, even if you don't even follow water, you've watched over the last 6 months as like the conditions in the Colorado River get like continually worse in terms of water supply. And it's a huge fight going on right now, and it's not looking good. And a lot of people have cut back on irrigation in the basin. I mean, it's definitely not my area of expertise, but there is some amount of water that's used even just by municipal entities in California from the Colorado River. So they're getting those supplies squeezed over there too. So they're getting it from both sides. They're getting it from squeezed from the Delta, squeezed from the Colorado River. And, it's a scary place to be.
So, kind of last year we had the big surplus, billions of dollars to throw around. That's gone.
Yeah.
We have a deficit now, but, here we have Assemblyman Villa-Poudois introducing this kind of bond.
Yeah.
AB 305, the California Flood Protection Bond Act of 2024. Kind of, have you had a chance to look at it and kind of
I did
what
look
are your
at
thoughts
it.
of it?
I did look at it. I mean, it's pretty short right now. There's not like a dollar value assigned to it or anything. I did see that he wanted to focus on the San Joaquin Valley in particular, which is good. I think there's a really, flood management is a really complex web of agencies and responsibilities and entities. But, the big flood protection system in the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valleys was built by, a lot of it was built by local landowners, like going as far back as to the 1850s. Then Congress authorized flood control projects in the Sac Valley and the San Joaquin Valley in the early to mid part of the 20th century. Army Corps of Engineers either built new levees to connect the old ones, or just took over what the landowners had built years and years ago and just made it part of the system. DWR has some responsibility for overseeing it, but then local entities maintain it. So you've got all these different entities that have a hand in how flood protection works, but that's like a blessing and a curse, because on one hand, there are a lot of entities that could contribute to funding to improve flood protection, but it's not always easy to do. And so I think that's why, certainly when we look at the state federal flood protection system, which is about 16,000 miles of levees, 7 flood bypasses, multiple dams and weirs and all sorts of things, it always seems to be funded by some combination of state funding in the form of a bond, local funding, and maybe some federal funding. Right. And the locals usually fund those sorts of improvements through revenue generated through property taxes. So, okay, let's think about how that works. So in order to raise money to build and repair flood protection systems, you might there's an incentive to have more houses. Is that a good idea, to build more houses in the floodplain? So there's sort of these interesting...
Maybe that's the housing solution we need.
It's a housing... Well, we definitely need a housing solution. So he's focused on the San Joaquin Valley, which I think is smart, because there historically has not been quite, it seems, as much investment in the San Joaquin Valley as there has been in the Sacramento Valley. And if he is doing this, he's building it on, he is doing it, but he's building on about $4 billion in state investments from the Prop 1E bond. That was 2006. Yeah, so Prop 1E, voters passed about $4 billion for improving flood protection in the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valleys. And we've seen that all around the Sacramento region over the last several years, the excavators on the levees and this and that. And that money has really been used largely for building projects and in cooperation with local entities. So we have a long history of using bonds for the state's share of a flood protection project. And I think that's smart, because ultimately, and again, not an attorney here, but you got to know, if you work in water, you have to know enough about some of the special cases or whatever. Right. So there was this basically a finding of liability and a judgment against the state of California for a series of lawsuits that came out of the 1986 floods. So in 1986, there was massive flooding around Marysville and a couple $1 billion worth of property damage. And so as court battles do, they sort of plod along for year after year after year until finally there was a decision made. And a judge basically found that, look, the state of California took over, assumed management of all of these levees in this flood protection system, that it became responsible for what happens if it fails. And so the state was found liable, on the hook, for billions of dollars of damages resulting from a system that they inherited. Because again, these levees were built in like 1850 or 1910 or something. And then they just sort of took it over, handed off the responsibility for maintenance to others, and then some bad stuff happened. So the state is responsible if this system fails. The state is going to have to pay for it, not just pay for restoring or repairing part of it, but also paying for damages that result from a system failure here.
Wow.
So it is strongly in the state of California's interest to continue to invest in the flood protection system beyond what we've already done, just to maintain what we've done, continue to invest. Because, like we were talking about with the hydrology shift, the runoff is coming fast and furious, and it's going to get worse. So that's, I think there's a very strong state interest from like a taxpayer level. And I mean, as a taxpayer, I would rather spend a little bit more money right now to prevent the bill coming due a lot later and it being a lot higher because something breaks.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I was going to ask you next. Is the last water bond we had failed.
Yeah.
So what's the politics look like on a water bond?
Well, I mean, this is where we are again, right? 6 months ago, we were talking about, well, we have $100 million, so we can invest that, like state can invest in whatever we want. Like, do you remember when we had no dollars? And that was when we would pass water bonds.
Right. We just
natural resources bonds.
We just had some on the ballot, right? I think they all different school ones and things like that.
Oh yeah, we did.
All those passed.
They did, I think.
So
yeah, I mean, usually natural resources bonds tend to pass. I think there's always concern about what's the right size? How do we right size a bond? And there's some of these bonds are initiatives that are, from outside NGOs and organizations and interests, and then there are the legislative ones. And typically the legislative ones tend to certainly pass. Right. So I think it depends on who's generating the water bond. Outside organizations, it's maybe more of a gamble than something that has been blessed by your local assemblyman or assemblywoman or senator, right? Yeah, exactly. Something that they endorse. Like, hey, voters, we think this is such a good idea. We want you to endorse it too. And those tend to be, I think, more successful. So, but there have only been 2 natural resources bonds over the years that actually failed. And so there's a good success rate. Chances are if it's there, people will vote for it. There's obviously more of a need for more spending in the natural resources end. And typically the state has looked at it like that's a public good because no one entity will be benefiting from it. So if it benefits nobody, it benefits everybody, and everybody should pay for it. And that, I think, is the philosophy behind why we do natural resources bonds. When there's no money, then we have to, use the credit card, which is what we're doing, what we'd be doing. For flood protection, though, I kind of think that it's in a sort of similar category because there are like statewide liabilities at play here, and there are human lives at risk, and people are typically very willing to spend money on things that are going to protect life and property. And so I think, I would say that they probably have decent chances, but it's all about where people's mindsets are with spending. I mean, look at inflation has gone crazy, and like interest rates for home ownership are so high now. So I don't know what the appetite is. I don't know what the appetite is, but hopefully, there's a lot we can spend money on for sure.
Are you guys working or talking to the assembly member about expanding?
We haven't. No. Always happy to talk to anyone about it. There's a need for, on the environmental restoration side, more money for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program that we're involved in. State has contributed some money for that over the years, but the lion's share of the funding has come from the feds and from us. So there's always a need for more money for environmental restoration. There's always a need for more money for flood. I think you can put together a pretty good package. And I think we know what the third rails are now, really, for a lot of folks when it comes to water bonds and things like storage. People want to support storage, but I think some people still feel a little burned by how the Prop 1 process and the storage program, the $3 billion that were allocated, how that's played out. There are a couple of kind of winners, but there are a lot of folks who feel like they were promised that the money would be spent on something and it hasn't yet. Yeah. And so that, I think people are a little cynical about that right now.
If, an anonymous billionaire came to you and said, Alex, I want you to craft me a water bond that will pass and fix all of California's water problems. What would that look like and how much would it cost?
Oh, boy. Okay. So I have to think about that. I mean, it seems like the right size, based on what I've seen over the years, is like maybe somewhere between 5 to 7 billion and no more. Closer you get to 10 billion. I know Prop 1 was like 10 something, but the closer you get to 10, I think the more squirrely people get about it. There's a tension in how the way that funding that's provided through bonds is dispersed. So typically the way that you would do it to make it fair is to have everything be like a competitive grant program. So here's a bucket of money for upper watershed restoration, and it's a competitive grant program run through Department of Conservation or something. I'm making this up. That evens the playing field for a lot of people to an extent, because maybe you're a small county, you're a county and you're competing with other counties, and it doesn't look like a giveaway to anyone, right? But there are losers in that process too, because not everybody has the same resources to apply for those or to go through the process or the same technical expertise. So I guess that is to say that if I were structuring a bond, I would want it to be a blend of directed funding for certain projects as well as competitive grant programs. And that is because the other thing that happens that we've seen with competitive grant programs is that you tend to want to like sprinkle a little bit around to everything, and sometimes you can't make the impact that you could if you actually just threw a chunk of money at something. So it would be nice to have a blend of both. And I would say, look, there's always a need for some more flood funding. So there's got to be some there. Environmental restoration, there's a ton of restoration projects going on right now. And yeah, again, especially if they have cost shares, right? Make it a cost share for some of these projects. Groundwater recharge projects that are strategically located to help with clean drinking water and achieving the state's human right to water goals and SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requirements. So groundwater recharge projects, flood. I would throw more money at conveyance. I would say, because you know that you still have these 4 canal projects, 3 canals, 4 canal projects that have a really big need. I would put a certain amount of money towards additional conveyance. And then I would actually add more for competitive grant programs or funding for other conveyance needs. I mean, there are a lot of needs right now at like a smaller regional scale for getting water to like refuges or other recharge basins or what have you. So it'd be nice to have, $500,000 for, competitive grants for groundwater recharge, and maybe another $300 million for the big 4 canal projects.
That's it.
I mean, I don't know. Look, I'm trying to be realistic here, right? There are some folks that are not ever going to go for something that has a lot of money for directed funding. Right. And I get that, but as long as you have other competitive funding, I think you can do a good job. Upper watershed management, forest management, lots. I don't know how much, but a lot. Because that's with the wildfires. I mean, it was 3 years of drought and like calamitous wildfires, and now we're dealing with floods again. So we know that's the other side of the coin. I can't imagine how many
trees fell down out there too. But.
No, you know what is crazy? At least in Tahoe, I didn't see.
Really?
I mean, and I think part of that is because there was already a pretty big snowpack by the time the winds started.
Okay, there's kind of.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a tree person. I'm not a tree reader. I don't know. So I would say those are probably good. There are a lot of pilot projects that could take funding for trying to help species in terms of ongoing like real-time monitoring or habitat restoration. The categories seem to be the same more or less all the time. Mm-hmm. We might call them something different, but it's going to be flood. There's going to be some physical infrastructure for water conveyance. There's going to be some groundwater recharge. There's going to be upper watershed management, ecosystem restoration. So that's like 6. And then, there are always things like stormwater recapture, things to make Southern California excited.
Do we need more money for storage? Do we need more storage?
Well, I think that yes, and more of everything else too. Yeah. Groundwater storage, in particular, like we need the capacity to move water to recharge locations underground storage. There's
so the storage is there. We just need to.
There's a capacity of I think 50 million acre feet capacity. I think in just the San Joaquin Valley alone for recharge.
You always throw these huge acre feet numbers. Like how much does the Sacramento County use per year?
No, I don't know. But I think. Trying to think of, I don't know the answer to that one.
Do we know how much the state uses or no?
I don't know. You mean like municipal use? You mean like municipal? Oh, it varies. Southern California is really efficient, and I don't want to throw out a number that's wrong, but for a while there was a shorthand that an acre foot was about as much as an average family needed an average single family household for a year.
An acre foot. So we need 40 million acre feet.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. But that's just for human use.
For human use, okay.
Right. So growing stuff, it takes way more water. Right. So yeah, I think, we do need more storage. We need more underground storage. There are locations where we could do more above ground storage, but aside from a few of them, so Sites Reservoir is something that a lot of people, especially in the Sac Valley, want. Not going to be super helpful unless we fix the Delta issue, the Delta reliability issue. There are a couple other reservoir projects that have gotten funding in the San Joaquin Valley, and that's good. A lot of the proposed projects out there are just increasing existing storage locations, which makes a lot of sense. And so we can do that.
So but basically, there's not a lot of use to storing water if you can't move it.
Yeah, no, there's no reason there. Yes, you could still use it, but you're not going to be able to use it as well, and you're not going to be able to use as much of it, and you're not going to be able to use it when you need it. You're going to have to release more of it. You need both. Yeah, you can't have extra storage if you can't move it anywhere, and if you have all the conveyance capacity in the world and no way to store or slow the flows that go into the canals, and then that's not helpful either. So you kind of need both of it. You need the surface storage, you need the groundwater storage, and the conveyance.
Wow.
So.
Well, I hope you get in there and you expand the spawn.
Oh my God.
7 billion.
I know there are a couple others that are being discussed right now and proposed. And I think some of those would have, you know how this process works. It's like the water agencies are going to get their asks in line.
Right.
The NGOs are going to get their asks in line. Legislature is going to, set its priorities. And then it's just all a negotiation on, there'll probably be like 4 or 5 competing ones, and then they all roll up or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I typically vote for those. The older I've gotten, it's really funny. When I was younger, I voted no on all the spending, but when there was a proposition on the ballot, but when it was something related to like a policy change, and I agreed with it, I would vote yes. The older I get, the more I'm like, man, I'm voting for the things to spend money. I do not want to screw. We've mucked around with the Constitution so much. It's like knowing the unintended consequences of something that you pass in, the 70s,
right.
And how
and
it locks you in. I mean, the boom and bust of our budget. Why is that? Well, let's go back to like
Prop 13. Yep.
Exactly. And the blowback and the further effects from that. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just the unintended consequences are so much more nebulous and unknown for policy changes than they are for spending. Yeah. For spending, it's just like, okay, add it to the credit card. Eventually, we'll pay it off. So I don't know.
We'll see.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that was. Yeah. I don't know if there was anything else that was. Yeah. I mean, there's flood stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity on the flood end, though, to do multi-benefit projects. And I hope that whatever bond comes out, that there's enough money in there to really put dollars towards projects that allow rivers to balloon out and expand during flood times, capture that water in situ, in place for groundwater recharge and for habitat, and kind of check those boxes all at once, because that's overly constraining a river is quite literally disastrous. Yeah. So I know that the thinking on a lot of that has changed over the years, and it's just something that we continually need to invest in. And yeah, I mean, it's weird to think that during years where we have a deficit is when we need to pass bonds, but that's how we keep the wheels rolling in those years. So yeah.
Well, hopefully with all this water here, it'll be fresh on people's minds.
I know, that's the other thing.
When we vote.
Yes, that's exactly. Like, remember this last year? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you can spend money on during a drought to build drought resilience, but it doesn't do much unless you're also spending money when it's wet.
Right.
So yeah.
Thinking for tomorrow. Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Always fascinating as always.
Thanks for having me. World.
Yeah. And looking forward to see what's coming on this year, because last time you were on, your episode released, and all of a sudden the state, came out with all these changes to the water program, and it's like they were listening.
It's like someone was listening out there. Yeah. No, there's always going to be some new plan or some new thing, because you can't take your eye off the ball. Not in a place like this. No. You have to continually be planning. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you. Okay.
Until next time.
Yep. You bet.